This is a recap of my 5th month as a full-time artist, but this is a special month because it's also been a year since I started selling art. I filmed my first monthly recap video on May 22nd, 2024, and I'm writing this script on May 22nd, 2025. As you know, if you've watched my videos, it's hard for me to say that I've been an artist for a full year because there were a couple months in 2024 where I wasn't able to focus on my business at all. However, I still think it's important to reflect and look back at the experiences that moved me forward and held me back. I feel like it's pretty easy to get discouraged when you're always looking at your performance metrics month over month because it's natural for your performance to dip. It's unrealistic to expect that you're going to consistently grow every single month. So I think it's helpful every once in a while to zoom out and look at that data over a longer period of time because you tend to see that over time you've been improving more than you thought you were. I'm going to follow the structure of my very first video, so I'll be breaking from the format of my usual monthly check-ins. For the sake of consistency and accountability, I'll also go through my monthly goals, to-do list, and benchmarks at the end, but we're also going to go through products, posts, and performance metrics, revenue and expenses, what had an impact, what I learned, and what I plan to change moving forward. Alright, let's start by going through all of the prints and products that I listed this year. On Etsy, I currently have 26 active listings and 27 listings that I either removed or let expire. I removed a lot of these listings because they just weren't performing well, and some of them I'm really bummed that they never sold. I listed these cute little custom mid-century inspired Christmas drawings that I personally really loved. This is the first one that I drew of our house, and I love this drawing so much I'm tempted to keep it up year-round. But these listings just never took off, and I was afraid that they were sinking my store's performance overall. Same with this little gallery wall set. I had this whole Fable collection and I really liked the idea of bundling them all together as a gallery wall. I think I just made this listing A, too complicated, and B, too expensive. There were a lot of options to customize the designs, the number of prints, the layout of prints, the type of frame. And because it was so expensive for me to print and frame all of these, it was also really expensive to buy the whole gallery wall set. So to kind of combat the fact that this was really expensive and complicated, I also added a digital version of the gallery wall set, but this one also never sold. One thing that I'm very surprised never sold is these tote bags. Tote bags are 100% my weakness. Because I use them every day, it feels like a justifiable purchase whenever I see a cute tote bag. So I thought I would be selling out of these left and right, but I don't think I've ever sold them. Same with these little tea towels. I ended up taking these down because they had never sold, but this was one of my favorite things in my store. I love hanging up fabric things. I feel like it's hard to find inexpensive, large wall art, and because I move so often, it's nice that I don't have to worry about transporting huge glass frames every time I move. I can just fold these up, and if anything, they make good packing material. I actually listed these tea towels before I'd ever listed any traditional paper art prints, because just personally, I'm more likely to buy a multi-purpose item like a tea towel or a tote bag, as opposed to a paper print that has to be handled and stored really delicately. But this was a great lesson that my buyers are not me. They don't necessarily think like me, they don't necessarily want what I want, they don't necessarily have the same preferences as me. Part of the problem was that I didn't try hard enough to sell people on why I love these items so much, but part of this was also just the learning curve of discovering what my audience likes and dislikes. Okay, now that we've looked at those, let's look at the items that I do still sell. On Etsy, I have 3 sweatshirts, 2 t-shirts, 2 enamel mugs, 2 glasses, 1 sticker, 6 prints, and 6 commission offerings. On my website, I have 3 stickers, 3 sweatshirts, 2 hats, 1 tote bag, 2 enamel mugs, 2 glasses, 7 prints, and 1 commission offering. I'll get into performance metrics in a second, but especially if you've never watched my channel before, I would love to hear your guesses on what my top 3 best-selling items are. I'll say it in a second, so if you want to leave your guess, pause this video and leave a comment below. Okay, so my absolute best-selling item of all time is this Delft pet portrait. At this time, I've sold over 40 of these. Following that is my Collectors Club stickers. I believe at this time I've sold 19 of these. And then following that is the Fox and Crow bookplate print. I've sold 12 of these. The biggest thing that I've learned from my top performers is that there is very little predictability in what will perform well. When I first launched Green Velvet, I had 2 collections, the Frog and Scorpion and the Fox and Crow. Both collections had the same set of products, just with 2 different designs. And I did that on purpose because I wanted to see if there was more predictability from the type of product sold or the subject matter of the item. After I ran that test, I ran a different test with my prints, which I have a video on. In that video, I wanted to see if a product would sell better if it was intentionally targeted to one specific niche, or if it was customizable and marketed to a broader audience. What I learned from those tests is that it is very hard to predict what will perform well. This Delft listing is the perfect example of that. I listed this in September, nobody bought it. October, nobody bought it. November, 1 person bought it. And then out of nowhere, I was getting 5 to 9 commission orders every single month. Once that listing started performing well, I wanted to better understand, was it the style or the fact that it was a custom offering? So I made a non-custom listing in the same style. That did not perform well. So then I made a new custom listing in the same style as my second best performing print, and that also didn't perform well. But because my top listing took 3 months to perform well, it's really hard to figure out if these listings will never do well or if I'm just a month away from selling a ton. That's why in general, I really take performance metrics with a grain of salt and try to celebrate my sales and performance separate from my effort. Because yes, in general, if you work harder, you'll sell more, but there is always an element of luck that's completely out of your control, which is definitely proven by the fact that when this item started selling really well, I was not actively marketing anywhere. At that time, I had just started a new job and I had really taken a backseat with this business, but for some reason, I started getting in front of the right customers at the right time. Over time and with experience, I'm sure things start to get more predictable. I'm sure I'll start to recognize patterns in who my audience is, where they're showing up, and why they're buying from me. But because this is so new to me and because I'm working off of limited data, it just feels like there's no consistency and no 100% predictable formula for buyer behavior. I love data and I love running these little experiments, so you bet your ass I'm going to keep trying to find a predictable formula. But at least so far, I found a lot more success in just embracing spontaneous opportunities than I have in trying to control or replicate past accomplishments. This Delft print was the first thing I posted that wasn't part of my Fable collection. It was something that I painted for myself because I personally like this style, and I wanted art in my house that matched my decor. It wasn't really cohesive with the rest of my work. It didn't necessarily make sense for my brand. At that point, I didn't picture the future of my business to include doing custom work or commissions. Honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that I had taken a step back from this business, I probably would have deleted this listing after the first couple months because it wasn't performing well and it didn't necessarily make sense with the rest of my work. As you can tell by the other listings that I deleted, I can be a very impatient person and I make pretty rash decisions based on short-term data, but this listing was the best lesson in forcing myself to be patient. Honestly, that's probably my biggest takeaway from this year. Good things take time, patience, and persistence. It's funny because I worked at a marketing agency for years and that was always what I was trying to get my clients to understand. You can't try something new for 2 seconds and then pull the plug the second that you don't see immediate returns. Anything new that you try is going to take time to catch on. You have to give things time to work because if you're constantly jumping from new thing to new thing, you're going to convince yourself that they've all failed and eventually you'll run out of things to try. However, it's much easier to give that advice when you're working at an agency and spending someone else's money. It's a lot scarier to see performance go down when it's your sales and income on the line. Which honestly, that's a great segue into marketing because the other huge thing I learned this year is that it's so much easier for me to tell other people how to market themselves than it is for me to market myself. I feel like I have a really great understanding and background in marketing. I've been a senior strategist of a marketing agency. I've been the director of marketing of a nonprofit. I built marketing plans for everyone from startups to Fortune 500 companies across all industries. However, none of that prepared me to actually be in front of the camera, be vulnerable, and actually sell my work. None of that prepared me to risk my time, effort, and money on ideas that may or may not work. I feel like I have a killer marketing plan, but do I actually execute it every month? Absolutely not. And honestly, I think that's because I got so caught up in my formal understanding of marketing. So I built my marketing plan based on what I should do rather than what actually feels authentic and enjoyable for me. And because of that, executing my marketing plan felt exhausting and disingenuous. That's honestly why I'm so excited to start my marketing series called Creative Connection, because the number one thing that I learned in my first year as a creative business owner is that the best marketing plan is the one that you actually feel excited to execute. Anyway, as someone whose professional background is in marketing, I do feel slightly embarrassed that I feel like marketing was my biggest shortcoming this year, but I think it's one of those situations where my rigid understanding of the rules stopped me from just having fun and being myself. However, the other thing that I really had to come to terms with is the fact that marketing myself is probably never going to feel comfortable or authentic to me, because in general, I don't feel comfortable putting myself out there. My marketing plan was based off of 2 things. The things that I should do but didn't want to, like social media and ads, and the things that I really want to do but scare the shit out of me. Those are things like creating one-on-one connections, showing up to more local things, being at in-person events, doing more direct outreach, generally just putting myself in situations where I could either end up getting a great opportunity or getting rejected. Because I found myself avoiding both the things I should do but didn't want to do and the things that I wanted to do but scared me, I ended up just kind of not marketing at all. The only things that I really was consistent with was YouTube and kind of email marketing. And that's because those were the only things that existed and that overlap of things that I feel comfortable doing and things that I like to do. Before we get into performance metrics, let's take inventory of my marketing activity in the last year. Since I first announced my business, I posted on my main Instagram account 32 times. I didn't post anything between July 15th, 2024 and January 22nd, 2025. I posted 31 times on TikTok, pretty much the exact same content that I was posting on Instagram. I posted 37 YouTube videos and 17 YouTube shorts. I've sent 6 email campaigns. I've run 2 paid Google ad campaigns, boosted 1 Instagram post, and have run Etsy ads with a $2 a day budget since August 2024. Here are the top performing posts from each platform. Generally, the videos that I'm in tend to perform better, which is kind of a bummer because I don't feel like showing myself is necessarily the best way to promote my art. I feel like these posts tend to grow my audience but don't necessarily have any impact on my sales, which I know sales isn't everything, but I don't want to build an audience that's only following me because they want to see content that I don't plan to make in the future, if that makes sense. That was also a big revelation that I had this year. I don't have to make the content that performs well. My goal is not to perform well on social media. My goal is to sell my art. We as business owners are often following video formats from influencers and large social media creators because we see that when we make those posts, they tend to perform better. But I think we forget that for those creators, that video is what they're selling. Because they make their money off of views, their goal is to get as many views and as much engagement as possible, and they don't need their audience to take action beyond that for them to make money. But we, as artists and business owners, have to have a different strategy because we're not necessarily getting paid for our views or our engagement. We're getting paid when people buy our art. So we can follow the strategy of these influencers and large social media accounts, and we might see a lot of growth on social media, but that success might not translate into sales. My goal for social media moving forward is to just not pay attention to performance metrics and instead just use social media when I want to for the purpose of connecting with my community and sharing what I'm excited to share. When I take a step back and look at what my goal is with social media, my goal is not to be an influencer. My goal is not to get a lot of engagement. My goal is to have a place where I can build connections and share my work. And I don't need to please the algorithm or use the right keywords or post at a consistent cadence to reach those goals. Okay, on to performance metrics. On TikTok, I got 17,315 views, 1,471 likes, 26 shares, 68 comments, 97 follows, 24 website clicks, and 0% of my sales were attributed to TikTok. TikTok is the platform that I'm most excited to abandon. It's not a place that I really like to spend my time on anymore, and it's definitely not a place that I like to post on. Looking at Instagram, when I first started Green Velvet, I only had 1 Instagram account, which was Green Velvet Creative. Recently, I started a separate Instagram for my pet portraits called Corduroy and Friends. These metrics account for both accounts. So in total, I had 32,220 impressions, 1,920 engagements, 253 website visits, 635 followers, and Instagram accounted for $212 of my website sales. I really want to love Instagram. In my personal life, this is the only platform that I still post on. I talk a lot about this in the intro video for the marketing series that I'm about to post, but Instagram, both as a user and as a creator, just doesn't really feel fun anymore. And I just want to get back to a place where Instagram is just a pretty portfolio and a way to share my feelings and connect with you all, rather than a place where I'm super focused on doing things correctly and increasing my performance metrics. Okay, looking at YouTube, I got 104,000 views, 4.4 thousand subscribers. I made $179 off of ad revenue. I got 474 website clicks, 1,487 Etsy clicks, and YouTube led to $226 worth of sales on my website. Other than my actual art, I feel like YouTube is the thing I'm most proud of from this business. I've always really loved making videos. I've actually had a YouTube since 2011, so I'm really happy that I now actually get to do this. So thank you all so much for being here and helping me reach 100,000 views and almost 5,000 followers. It has been awesome. YouTube also led to 19% of the sales I got on my website. I can't see how many Etsy purchases came from YouTube, but I imagine it was also a good amount, so thank you so much for being so incredibly supportive. Connecting with you all and hearing your stories and following your channels has honestly been my favorite part of this journey so far. Looking at email, I sent 6 campaigns. I got 145 opens, 28 clicks with a 19.2% click rate, and my email campaigns led to $13.12 of sales. I'm very curious to know what you all say in your emails. Honestly, my email subscriber list is bigger than I thought it would be, but I haven't sent an email in a couple months because I'm just struggling to know what to say or what people would care about. I don't really know if I necessarily care about getting sales from email as much as I just want to use email to connect with you all and have real conversations. However, I worry that I'm just saying that because I feel uncomfortable selling things, and I don't know if I'm screwing myself out of all viable sales tactics by using all of these platforms to just connect with people rather than sell things, but I don't know, we'll see. And then surprisingly, let's look at my Pinterest metrics. I got 77,000 impressions, 3.2 thousand engagements, 389 saves, and 105 people clicked on my Etsy from my Pinterest account. I truly did not even realize I was posting on Pinterest until I looked at my Etsy traffic and realized how many people had come to my Etsy from Pinterest. Apparently I have it set up to automatically post anything I post on Instagram to Pinterest, which is kind of embarrassing because that means every time that I've made a mistake and posted something twice, it's posted both versions on Pinterest. But yeah, I got double the impressions and engagements on Pinterest compared to Instagram, so that's good to know. I love Pinterest personally, I just have always used it very privately and I've never really used it in a professional marketing sense. But I'm excited about the potential here because I could see posting on Pinterest being a lot less exhausting than posting on other social platforms. In fact, Pinterest and YouTube are the only social platforms that I still have on my phone. So anyway, yeah, that's a cool discovery. And then looking at Google, so I had run those 2 paid campaigns, and then I also have a Google Merchant Center set up. So from my paid ads, I got 20,000 impressions, 560 clicks, and it led to $0 of sales. From my Google Merchant Center or organic traffic, I got 9.3 thousand impressions, 401 clicks, and it led to $100 in sales. I think Google Ads are a scam, which is a sentiment that a lot of you validated the last time I said this. So I was charged $86 for 560 clicks that they said my ads drove to my website. However, when I look on both Google Analytics and my website analytics through Wix, there was really no increase in traffic on the days that I ran those ads. And when I look at the traffic that was actually attributed to paid ads, there were about 10 website visits attributed to paid Google ads. So I went back to Google and disputed that charge and basically said, clearly these clicks were bots because they didn't actually lead to any increase in website traffic. But Google came back and said it must have been a reporting issue within Google Analytics, which is bullshit. So anyway, I had to pay $86 for nothing. I might be misunderstanding the situation. I don't know anything about paid ads, so if you're a paid media expert and you want to tell me what went wrong here, please leave it in the comments because I'm very confused about that situation. Anyway, this is something that I wish that I understood better, but from my understanding, paid media is an auction. You're bidding on ad space against competitors, which leads me to think that if I have a small ad budget and I'm fighting for space against big corporations with big ad budgets, I'm always going to lose. However, this seems to be even worse than a traditional auction because in this case, Google will still find a way to charge you even if you're losing out on that ad space. Anyway, probably not a marketing tactic that I will continue to use unless I learn a lot more about paid media. Okay, looking at my website, I had 1,505 sessions, 34 orders, totaling $1,184 in revenue. My website is definitely a weak point. I love how it looks, but I've definitely neglected it in terms of building out content or making sure that it's search engine optimized or even driving traffic to my website. So that's something that I really want to focus on in the next couple months. And then lastly, Etsy. I got 10,000 views, 83 orders totaling $4,734. I received 1,260 favorites, 127 follows, and 23 5-star reviews. Offsite ads accounted for $539 of my sales. Etsy ads led to $1,230 of sales, and $321 came from my social links. In the beginning, I was very hesitant to even start an Etsy shop. It just didn't make sense for me to list products on a platform that would take a cut of my sales when it didn't really have much more capability than my website. Obviously, there's a lot of criticism surrounding Etsy and their very high fees. However, I found that I really love being on a marketplace. Having a website on its own doesn't really do anything for your visibility unless you're actively driving traffic to your website. So I couldn't just make a website, do nothing else, and still expect to get sales, but that is what happened on Etsy. If you recall from what I said earlier, I mentioned that I didn't post on social media from July 2024 to January 2025 During that time, I also didn't send out any emails. I think I posted once on YouTube, but all in all, I wasn't actively promoting during that time. And while that dip is absolutely reflected in my website traffic, I think the most sessions per day that I got during that time period was 4. During that same time period, my orders actually increased on Etsy. Etsy gets a lot of criticism for fees, but honestly, I think it's worth it. I regularly will log into my personal Etsy account, search for my products, and click on them just to see if I'll get served ads for my products. And without fail, Etsy will bombard me on every platform with my own products. I'll get emails, I'll get social ads, I'll get banner ads on any website that I visit. I would never be able to get in front of people like that on my own. I just do not have the visibility or the ad budget or the understanding of paid media to get in front of people like that. They also remit taxes on my behalf. They make it so much easier for me to take international orders. There's a built-in level of trust and credibility both from the buyer and the seller because you can dispute issues if anything happens. They remind my customers to leave me a review about 1,000,000 times. They have super in-depth analytics, and I do feel like I actually see a direct return on my ad spend. I don't know, I definitely had incredibly low expectations for Etsy before I started, but I have been genuinely shocked and surprised by how much I love this platform. Alright, now on to revenue and expenses. I don't usually talk about my expenses in these monthly check-ins, but you get a special treat since this is the year anniversary of my business. So between 2024 and 2025, I totaled $7,322 in revenue. My cost of goods sold was $2,721. I paid $699 in fees, $1,054 for marketing, $891 for tech, which means I profited $1,955 with a 25% profit margin. $7,000 might sound like nothing to you. It's definitely not an impressive enough number that I'm going to put it in this video's thumbnail or anything. But for me, the fact that I've made $7,000 off of my art is unfathomable. I definitely want to see my expenses go down in the next couple months. My biggest expense in this last year was production or cost of goods sold. Most of what I sell is fulfilled on demand, mostly because I'm still testing out what performs well and I don't have the money to place bulk orders or keep inventory on hand. But that means I pay for the production of every item individually and I don't benefit from any sort of bulk discounts. My sweet mother got me a printer a few months ago and it has seriously changed my business so much. There were months where I was spending almost $300 to produce the art prints that people were buying off of my Etsy because I really wanted my prints to be on watercolor paper and to look and feel as close to the original piece as possible. But now that I have a printer, I can literally print on the same paper that I drew or painted the original on, so it doesn't get any closer than that. Through my print provider, a 4x6 print is $8 and an 8x10 print is $11. But to print at home, it's about 29 cents per print. So I'm already having much more profitable months just by being able to print at home. I have an in-person art show coming up. If I were to order 40 4x6 prints and 20 8x10 prints, even with bulk discounts, it would still cost me $298 through my print provider. But this printer was $299, so it's already paid for itself. I mean, obviously, it was a gift, so it already paid for itself, but you know what I mean. Focusing more on my website and less on Etsy would also lower my expenses a lot. All of the fees and marketing costs that you see on here were from Etsy. However, I'm going to say it again, those fees and marketing are literally the reason why I had sales at all. Etsy did the hard work of marketing my business, remitting my sales tax, and pushing for reviews, even when I was fully checked out of this business for months in 2024. In the same way that it was worth it for me to sacrifice some of my profits to fulfill my products on demand, so that I didn't have to front the money to buy and store inventory, it was also worth it for me to sacrifice some of my sales to Etsy for them to find me buyers. Once I learn more, build up more of an audience, get better at driving traffic to my website, I will rely a lot less on Etsy, and once I sell at more in-person events, have more cash saved up, and have more of a reason to keep inventory on hand, I'll rely a lot less on print on demand. For now, I don't regret those costs. I kind of see them as the training wheels of starting a new business, but as I learn more and start being able to do more by myself, I can definitely see those expenses going down. My profit margin is already a lot better this year than it was in 2024. It's about 41% compared to last year, which was 11%. I'm still very proud that I haven't had an unprofitable month so far. Because I'm continuing to find new ways to get my expenses down and get my revenue up, I'm really hopeful about these numbers improving. Alright, if we're looking at which marketing tactics directly led to the most amount of revenue, Etsy ads and YouTube definitely had the biggest impact. TikTok accounted for 0% of my sales, Instagram accounted for 3%, YouTube 9%, Google 1.6%, email 0.2%, Etsy ads 28.4%, unknown 10%, organic Etsy 47.5. So between Etsy ads and offsite Etsy ads, I made $1,769, which was 28% of my revenue. If we assume that my social sales came from YouTube, which is a realistic guess because that's the only place I've shared my social link, then I've made $547 from YouTube, which is 9% of my revenue. Technically, my direct sales was higher at 10% or $631. I'm guessing that these were most likely purchases from my friends and family. So I guess technically my second best marketing tactic was just word of mouth and real life connections, which is good because that's the marketing tactic I definitely want to lean the most into moving forward. Instagram also accounted for 3% or $212, which is not insignificant. I talk a lot of shit about social media because I was convinced that it didn't lead to any sales at all. But I do think if I was actually able to find a way to enjoy using these platforms, it could do good things for my business. And again, if we look at the non-monetary benefits that Instagram has had, it's definitely done good things for my business because I've been able to make connections with you all. So what had no impact on sales? TikTok, shocker, 0%. Google, shocker, because my site is not at all search engine optimized and I don't understand paid ads. And then lastly, email. I don't know how y'all are making money off of email, but again, I don't mind that it hasn't made me money because I have had good conversations and good opportunities come from it. All right, what have I learned? The biggest thing I learned, or I guess was reminded of, is just how important art is to me. One of the main reasons I started this business was because a few years ago I realized I hadn't made art since college. Years had gone by where I felt like all I had done was consumed rather than created. I was spending so much time just mindlessly consuming content on my phone, mindlessly watching TV, and just buying shit that I didn't need all the time. I genuinely feel like art in a lot of ways has given me my life back. I didn't realize how disconnected I had become from myself and from the world around me, and it feels so good to actually be creating again and see my skills improve and look back at my days and actually feel like I did something productive instead of just wasting all of my time. Art has also allowed me to make connections again. The years leading up to starting this business, I felt like I was so inside my head and so inside my phone. And I kind of feared that becoming a full-time artist would isolate me further because art has always been a very internal, reflective process for me. But in order to find success in selling my art, I've had to make connections with people. I've had to put myself out there and be vulnerable. I've said this before, but while I don't think art is going to be what solves all of our problem, I definitely think it's a good start. Anything that can serve as a point of connection or a way to build community, a way to create more than we destroy or consume, a way to slow down and get off our phones and stop consuming so much rage bait and propaganda and toxic shit. I do feel like that's going to make a huge difference in uniting us moving forward. Anyway, on to a list of practical things that I learned about running a business. The first thing I learned, and the biggest piece of advice that I would have for people who are just starting out, is to give yourself time to try and fail and learn what's right for you. I see so many established artists recommend to not waste your time on a ton of platforms, to not confuse your audience by trying to be too many things. Their recommendation is always to choose one niche, one platform, one medium, one style. And while I do think that that's great long-term advice, because eventually you don't want to spread yourself too thin, you don't want to burn yourself out or try to be everything to everybody. But in order to know what platform, niche, medium, style is right for you, you need to give yourself time to explore and try different things. You don't want to back yourself into a corner that you don't enjoy just because you didn't test out all of the options first. If you're like me and you get really easily distracted, there's definitely a fine line and a balance to strike with this. I'm the type of person who gets really excited by new ideas and will go all in on it for a week, but not see it through. So I've really had to force myself to stay focused and actually finish projects before starting something new. However, I don't know what the future holds, and I don't want to close myself off to opportunities by saying, this is the only thing that I am and will ever be. So at least for people like me, I feel like the right answer is to stay focused on an idea, but find structured, controlled ways to explore side projects and make sure that you're not closing yourself off to new opportunities and giving yourself time to explore everything that interests you. My next lesson or piece of advice is to not be afraid to raise your prices when you can't keep up with demand. Anyone with a shred of imposter syndrome knows that it's really hard to raise your prices. And when something is selling well, it can be scary to raise the price because you don't want to mess it up. But if you can't fulfill orders fast enough, that means two things. 1, there's clearly enough demand for your product that you can justify raising your price, and 2, you need to find a way to slow your orders down or you won't be able to keep up. Especially if you offer commission or freelance services where there's a finite amount of work that you can do within a period of time, definitely don't be afraid to raise your prices. My next lesson was to not make long-term decisions based on short-term data. I think it's really important and valuable to look into your data, to map your customer's journey, understand who's buying, what products and platforms are driving your sales, and what barriers are standing in the way of your customers. In fact, the second and third episodes of Creative Connection will be about journey mapping and audience segmentation. However, I think it's really easy to make misguided decisions or pull the plug on things too early if you're too influenced by the increases and decreases that are bound to happen when you're looking at performance metrics month over month. I have a really bad habit of taking down posts and listings that aren't immediately performing well, which, like I said, my biggest bestseller didn't perform well for the first 2 months that it was up, which means there's a potential that I've taken down products that would have performed well had I been patient and given them time to find their audience. This is definitely a product of my long-standing need for external validation, and if you relate to that, definitely be conscious of it when you're running your business. If you're really impulsive, reactive, or easily swayed by external validation, make sure you're just checking your performance metrics as a way to observe what's happening in your business rather than make rash decisions. For me, I think I'm going to implement a rule where I can only make changes to my product set or my marketing plan every quarter so that I'm not switching things around so often that I don't know what works long term. The next thing I learned is how important it is to document your journey early on. Obviously, we all need to document things like revenue and expenses because we pay taxes, but I think it can also be really valuable to document your performance metrics, your thoughts, your feelings, updated goals, and predictions for where your business is going. There are so many people who don't start documenting their journey until they already feel like they've made it, but when they reflect back on their journey, they often just remember the right decisions that they made to get there rather than the wrong decisions or pivots that they made along the way. But I think you can learn more from what doesn't work than what does work. My next lesson is to not let being a business owner get in the way of being an artist. This is still something that I really struggle with. I keep feeling like I need to get to a point where my art feels finished before I can start promoting it. But why would I want the art to be finished? That's the part I enjoy. I've had multiple months where I feel like I'm so focused on admin work or promotion or creating content that I forget to actually create new art. And I definitely want to make practicing and learning and creating for myself a bigger focus so that even during months where I'm not finishing new work, I can at least still feel creatively fulfilled. Last thing before we get into to-do lists and benchmarks is what I plan to change. My goal for the rest of the year is to just be brave. I hate being new at things, which is a very bad trait to have, but it's definitely true. It scares me to not know how to do things, and I feel a lot more comfortable researching things instead of actually doing them. As I talked about before, I know a lot about marketing, but I'm not brave enough to put myself out there. I've learned a lot about in-person art fairs, but that doesn't mean I'm brave enough to apply. I have a whole list of businesses and artists that I've researched and want to collaborate with, but that doesn't mean I'm brave enough to contact them. In all of those situations, I am what's standing in my own way. However, I'm the best thing to have in my way because that's in my control. And at some point, I will realize that running this business has required me to do a ton of things that scared me. And not only have I survived them all, they all became things that I eventually felt comfortable doing. It sucks to be scared, but I'm only going to be scared until I do it because it's not the thing that scares me, it's the unknown. It's the anticipation. So I'm doing that to myself by not just doing the things that scare me. And then as I mentioned, I want to create for fun a lot more. I want to practice and learn more about technique. And the rest is just patience. I really want to let myself live in the present and just trust that there are good things around the corner instead of constantly trying to control and force things to work out. The more that I get out of my own way and step out of my comfort zone, the more doors will open and the more opportunities I can have. So those are my goals. Just be more creative, do more of what I enjoy, step out of my comfort zone, and be more open to opportunities. All right, let's map out my progress toward my benchmarks. I was 60% of the way toward meeting my commission goal, 3% of the way toward my goal of selling 30 prints a month. I've met my subscriber and watch time goals. I was 17% of the way toward my goal of making 30 Etsy sales per month. I'm still selling in 0 locations, and I was 24% of the way toward my sales goal. As far as my monthly goals go, I did 4 of them this month. I monitored data and optimized monthly, created 1 new print, took care of my physical and mental health, taking 1 day off a week, and stayed focused, not getting distracted with new ideas. And then looking at my May to-do list, I was able to finish my local collection, get inventory ready for my June in-person events, and I made progress on my marketing content. I did not reorganize my website, list pet apparel, or start my pet collection outreach, which means my goals for June are to reorganize my website, list my pet apparel, start pet collection outreach, and make my local collection content plan. As always, I'm glad you're here. Thank you for listening.